unfortunately today, it takes a little bit of a different shape because our tea will be served after the presentation. This auditorium doesn't have the tables in it, and I wasn't sure what you would do with your china cups once you finished your tea. So we will serve tea and cookies afterwards if you'd like to stay. A couple of house rules, please. Number one, please make sure your cell phone is off. And as I stand here, I realize mine isn't, and I will dash to my purse and turn it off as soon as this is over because I made that mistake before. Number two, for students particularly, if you think that you're going to have to leave before 5:30, I have two suggestions. One would be to leave now. I don't like people leaving in the middle of someone's talk. And if it's going to be absolutely imperative that you cut out right at 5:30, I would ask that you try to sit in the back. Please do not get up in the middle of the row and crawl out while someone as distinguished as our professor who's speaking today is speaking. That is really impolite. So please do us that favor. That's my second house rule. My third house rule is what we have decided at the Jackson Center is these seminars begin the discussion. You're not going to get all your questions answered today. You're not going to probably not going to make your mind up today. But what we want you to do is talk about it. Get out of here and talk about it. Surprise yourself. Talk about it at the dinner table. Talk about it with your friends. That's what these seminars are about. It is to begin the discussion. And we really must have discourse, my friends. That's very important in any culture, particularly in an institution of higher learning. So please do that for us. If you have not availed yourself of our schedule for the year, they're out on the table with the tea. We hope you'll come to all of our events. They're all free. They all serve tea and they all serve cookies. So, with all of that having been said, I want to introduce our speaker. Now, if I were to give you a formal introduction here, a real biographical introduction, at 5:30, I'd be finished with the introduction. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to tell you, first of all, that it is my deep pleasure to tell you that this man is not only my colleague, he's a very good friend of mine, and we have known each other a long time. But I want to tell you that besides being such an honorable friend, Richard Collin is one of the finest scholars I know. He is the Palmetto Professor of Politics here at Coastal. He's a political science professor here at Coastal. He is known pretty much in the Western world over and in the Eastern world some too. He's written lots of books. I had somebody in this audience call me, Alice called me and said, oh, I've read his books. So, and to tell you that it's a pleasure and an honor to have him speaking today is really not to tell you how I feel. I am awed that Richard has agreed to share with us his opinion. We hope it starts a lot of controversial discussion. Our plan is that Richard will talk between 30 and 45 minutes, then he'll stop and ask for questions. I promise you, and this is my promise, at 5:30, I will come up and say, those who must leave and go to class, please feel free to. I understand that a lot of you are in here for 1 hour, and we will call time. I will never keep you over time. Those of you who would like to stay can stay and ask more questions, and then we can move to the foyer and mingle with Richard and have some tea. Okay? I hope all of you enjoy it. I'm planning on it. Please help me welcome my friend and this wonderful professor, Dr. Richard Collin.
Thank you so much, Claudia. It's lovely to be people filtering in. Come on in and sit down. Well, Gully, I'm so happy to be here today. Mind you, I guess I'm reaching the age where I'm tolerably happy to be anywhere on a given day, but I'm particularly happy to be here with you today. I want to talk about Iraq. I'm probably making myself something of a bore on the issue of the war in the Middle East, but it does seem to me, whatever point of view we adopt towards the American invasion of and subsequently the occupation of Iraq, that there are ethical or moral responsibilities that we as citizens do have. and that we need to think about them. Those of you who are my students, and about half of you, I guess, are students in my classes, I do have to specify that I'm wearing a slightly different hat today from the one that I normally wear in class. Like most of my colleagues, I don't like to impose a given political opinion of mine on my students. And so I try and say both sides or cite both sides of an issue. I don't know if I were talking about Vice President Cheney. I suppose I'd have to say that his critics accuse him of being secretive, vulgar, and contemptuous of constitutional niceties. And I, in order to be even-handed, would have to think of something nice to say about Vice President Cheney. Like, well, he once shot a lawyer, so he can't be all bad. Having said that, this is not a class. You all came here voluntarily, although the doors are being sealed as I speak. I've been interested in the Middle East now really since I took a class in Babylonian history at Harvard in 1962. And if my math is correct, that means that I've been following this part of the world for 45 years. I've traveled in the region. Oddly enough, the only country in the Middle East that I never actually visited was Iraq, because the Iraqi government had the good sense not to let me in back in the 60s, in the 70s when I tried to go there. Rather than strive, therefore, for some artificially balanced point of view, I'm just going to jump in and tell you what I think, and then I'll stop, partially because I want to, but partially because Claudia will kill me if I don't. I'll stop early enough to have lots of time for discussions with you. I'd like to ask two rather separate questions about the Iraq War. The first question is easy, and I think I know the answer myself. I want to ask whether this falls into the category of what philosophers call a just war. Were we ethically and morally allowed to attack Iraq in 2003? Indeed, were we obligated to attack the country at that time? The second question is rather more difficult, and only you know the answer. And the question here is, whether you find it just or unjust as a war, what ethical responsibility do you and I, as individuals, have in grappling with the fact that the United States is now engaged in an ongoing conflict? Well, let's tackle the easy question first. What constitutes a just war? It's a philosophical question that philosophers and people interested in ethics have puzzled over since the beginning of time, since St. Thomas Aquinas down to the present. And answers have ranged from a fully pacifist response that no violence is ever justified under any circumstances, down to a fairly pragmatic, rather cynical response from some political leaders who would see violence as merely a means by which a state accomplishes what it wishes to accomplish. In other words, just something that all governments do from time to time. I'm going to suggest that the answer to our question lies, generally speaking, in international law, and specifically in the Charter of the United Nations. The people who put the Charter together in 1945 had all lived through 2 world wars. They had a pretty clear idea what war was, and a pretty clear idea of what the moral aspects of it were. The United States took a lead in formulating this charter. We helped to write it. The charter takes the technical legal form of a multilateral treaty, which the United States ratified and signed and endorsed. Article 6, paragraph 2 of our Constitution puts treaty law on the same basis as statute law, which means that it's the law of the United States and needs to be obeyed by Americans, all the way from us down here to people who sit in the West Wing in Washington, D.C. Quite apart from its legal status, which I think is compelling, the Charter of the United Nations makes, in my view, pretty good sense. See what you think. The Charter begins in Article 2.4 simply by saying, don't make war. Don't wage aggressive war. Keep your soldiers on your territory and don't put them on other people's territory. Just avoid attacking one another. Sovereign states do not need to be marching their forces into the territory of other sovereign states. Article 51 of the Charter says that if there's a tense situation, if war is threatened, it's up to the Security Council to decide what to do. The Security Council can say, go ahead and fight if you have to. You can say that to one side. You can defend yourself. Under these circumstances, you may fight. Under other circumstances, you cannot. So the people who signed that charter back in 1945 technically gave up the right to make individual independent choices about when they would go to war and when they would not. The charter does specify that we always have the right of self-defense, that a country can, if Cuba attacks Florida tomorrow, or the Canadian Mounties spill over the Peace Bridge into Buffalo, might be a good idea. The Buffalonians could use Canadian health care, but that's another issue. If we are attacked by somebody unexpectedly, we have the right to defend ourselves. The administration, the Bush administration, defended its decision to go to war in 2003 primarily on the basis of self-defense. They alleged that the Iraqi government, under the leadership of the late, pretty much unlimited Saddam Hussein, had developed these weapons of mass destruction which were threatening both to the neighborhood, to the countries in the region, and to the United States. Were we defending ourselves then in 2003 against potential Iraqi aggression? The problem, of course, is that once we had secured the country, we couldn't find any weapons of mass destruction or any long-range weapons. Very little that could destabilize the region, and nothing that could reach the United States. The administration then turned and said, well, we had faulty intelligence. We were misled by the intelligence agencies that said that those weapons were there. This is kind of a problem or problematic defense for a couple of reasons. Iraq had been, prior to the invasion of 2003, one of the easiest countries on the planet to spy on. American intelligence coverage of Iraq goes back to the early 1970s when I was an employee of the Defense Intelligence Agency in the early 70s. I was there in Saudi Arabia, and we were in fact putting together an intelligence acquisition system that would defend the oil fields of Saudi Arabia against one danger from Iran, a danger which still persists, and another danger from Iraq, which was a volatile, unstable regime even then. That system, unless somebody dismantled it, would still have been in place in 2003. After the 1991 war, the United States and Great Britain awarded themselves the right to overfly Iraqi territory. South of the 33rd parallel and north of the 36th parallel, we had airplanes daily flying over that territory, taking pictures. We had satellites in the sky taking visual imagery, and electronic communication satellites picking up everything that was whispered in the ether. In all the years from 1991 to 2003, we never found any hard evidence that the Iraqis had weaponry that could threaten either the United States or the neighbors. Were we defending the neighborhood? Were we defending countries like Saudi Arabia, our good friends, the Syrians and the Iranians, or the Turks, who have the largest army in the region? You could make that case, and we certainly did make the case that we were defending other people there. That, again, there's a problem with the argument because none of the people in the region actually wanted us to invade Iraq. And with the exception of Kuwait, we had troops already in Kuwait thanks to the 1991 experience. With the exception of Kuwait, none of the powers in the region would allow us to station troops on their territory. If you're defending somebody, at their request, presumably they would let you station people there. Our good friends, the Saudi Arabians, in fact, evicted us from the one big base we had in Saudi Arabia just before the war to make sure that nobody would think that we were defending Saudi Arabia. There's no record of any government in the region, to include the Kuwaiti government, asking for our assistance in dealing with the issue of Iraq. Was it a preemptive war? There's a theory floating around that the Charter of the United Nations was based on the military science of the 1940s. We now have missiles and long-range weaponry. If we saw an enemy developing the kinds of weapon systems that could someday be used against us, surely it would be within our rights to attack them. Once again, we're faced with the absolute dearth of information that Iraq was in fact developing anything that could be used against much of anybody. In fact, this concept of preemptive or preventive war, which was discussed and mentioned by the president on a number of occasions, could be used as a justification for any large power to attack any smaller power anytime the larger power wished to do it. Did we attack Iraq to defend the people of Iraq from its government? Once the embarrassing failure of the weapons of mass destruction to exist came up, we then began saying, well, Iraq is much better off without Saddam Hussein. Now, the notion of a humanitarian war is a new, and by new I mean in the 1990s, a new idea in international law. The old notion was that states were responsible, sovereign states were responsible for what happened inside their own borders, and exterior states had no business intervening. For the first time on a big scale, we bombed Serbia in 1999. The Serbians were authentically committing a genocide against their own ethnic Albanian population in what was then part of Serbia. And President Clinton, together with Tony Blair, the then Prime Minister of Great Britain, sent in NATO air forces to bomb the Serbians until they stopped. In doing so, Clinton enunciated, if you will, a new idea in international law, that if a government was authentically committing mass destructive behavior against its own citizens, responsible people could intervene. This works comfortably on domestic law. If you're sitting in your front porch and you see your neighbor chasing his wife around with a chainsaw, you are legally allowed to interfere to protect the neighbor. You may even be morally responsible for taking those steps. Were we in that kind of situation in 2003? Once again, history is kind of a problem for us. Saddam Hussein had launched 2 genocidal attacks on large numbers of his own people. The first was at the end of the Iran-Iraq War in 1988, where he did authentically kill a large number of Kurdish people in the north, the so-called Anfal campaign. It's worth noting that we said nothing about it at the time, because we had in fact been on the side of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, effectively behind the scenes during the war. And so the administration of George Bush Sr., the father of the present president, made no comment on the fact that something like 250,000 Kurds had been killed. The second genocidal episode in Iraqi history took place in 1991. We attacked the country. The Shiites in the southern portion of the country rose up against their government. When we liberated Kuwait and moved back out of Iraqi territory in 1991, Saddam Hussein turned on the people whom he felt had betrayed him, and he killed some 10 or 15,000 of them in the reprisals that took place at this time. Clearly, he was the sort of person you didn't challenge. On the other hand, both of these incidents were well in the past. Once the 1991 war had been terminated, Saddam Hussein settled back into being just a normal Middle Eastern dictator. If you're going to behave as he did for all those years, you have to kill people from time to time, and he did kill people from time to time. He was an appalling human being. On the other hand, he was no worse than the overwhelming majority of the dictators in the Middle East or elsewhere in the world. But it makes very little ethical sense that we could swoop in 2003 and say, well, we didn't mention at the time, we're really still very angry at what you did to the Kurds 13 years ago, or to the Shiites 11 years ago. Your neighbor in 1988 beats up his wife. She forgives him, as wives do, and they go on living happily together. And you, in 2003, go over across the street and beat up your neighbor because a number of years before, he beat up his wife. Tell that to the local cops and see how far you get. It won't work. How did we make out in the war? Did the war result in good or in evil for the people of that country? 4.5 years after the invasion, the status of the average Iraqi citizen is manifestly worse than it was when Saddam Hussein was the leader of the country. Let me, instead of just asserting this, let me give you some statistical indicators. That nothing, I know my students really love it when I produce statistics. I'm sorry I don't have a PowerPoint projection here and the power to menace you with a quiz afterwards. But these statistics in no case are from some left-wing journal. They're all governmental statistics or hard statistics from groups capable of gathering this kind of information. There seem to have been about 80,000 Iraqis killed since 2003. We didn't kill them all. A good number of them were killed by other Iraqis, but this is the number of corpses brought to mortuaries. So this is a good, hard, and important number. 2 years ago, the Bloomberg School of Public Health, which is part of the Johns Hopkins University, conducted a really massive study, a massive and influential study, in which they concluded that between 2003 and 2006, there was about 2/3 of a million extra deaths. When I say extra deaths, we mean that in any society over time, people will die. People will die in Conway tonight. And you can keep fairly careful track of the number of people whom you would expect to lose in the course of a given year, or in this case, in the course of a given 3-year period. Once you had discounted the people who would normally have got old and died or got sick and died, the Johns Hopkins University found that there was 630,000 people dead above and beyond what you would expect to find in that population. This study was published in the world's premier medical journal, the Lancet. This year, 2007, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees has advised that there are about 4 million refugees, about 2 million of them people who have fled from the country, many of them living quite unhappily, I think, in Syria or in Jordan. Others have fled to other countries in the region. About 2 million people are internally displaced. These are people who have left their homes in Iraq. They haven't left the country, in most cases because they can't or can't afford to, and so they're living in other neighborhoods or in other cities in Iraq. This is about 15% of the population. Imagine a Katrina-style catastrophe that affected not just a couple of million people in Louisiana and Mississippi, but 15% of the American population. Regrettably, the 15% that has gone either into foreign exile or into domestic exile is in many cases, the elite of the population. These are your doctors, your nurses, your dentists, your engineers, your professors. I'm not sure if professors amount to the elite of the population, but you get what I mean. In May of 2007, the well-known and well-respected charity Save the Children produced some chilling statistics. Political scientists like to talk in terms of infant mortality statistics and childhood mortality statistics. Childhood mortality means the number of kids per 1,000 who fail to get that 5th candle on their birthday cake. They don't actually live to their 5th year of life. Before the invasion, the under 5 or childhood mortality rate in Iraq was an astonishingly high 50 per 1,000. After the invasion, it had climbed to 150 per 1,000. This means of every 1,000 children who are born today in Iraq, 150 of them will fail to reach their 5th birthday. This summer, in July of this summer, Oxfam America, this is not a radical group once again, this is Oxfam, one of the world's greatest charities. Oxfam America reported that 1/3 of the Iraqi population was in need either of food aid or medical aid, which they were not receiving. Did the invasion hurt the United States? I think we can prove pretty clearly that it didn't do much good for Iraq, but did it hurt us? The Princeton economist Paul Krugman estimated last year in a book that the total cost of the invasion up to last year, up to 2006, was probably going to amount to about $2 trillion. That's about 1/6 of our annual GDP. Krugman is a great critic of the American healthcare system, and he said that we could give health care to all the Americans who don't have health care for 40 years for $2 trillion. And therefore, if someone dies tonight in Conway of a disease that we could fix, they are also a casualty, in a sense, of the Iraq War. America's standing in the world has plummeted. The Pew Research Center finds that we are less popular on the planet now. This is places like Ireland and places like Indonesia. We are less popular now than at any time in our history as a country. Another poll said that in the Middle East, among Muslims, George Bush is less popular than Osama bin Laden. How many people have we lost? At 3 o'clock this afternoon, and this is Department of Defense statistics, we had lost, killed, among our service personnel, 3,782 people. Seriously injured since the first moments of the invasion to 3 o'clock this afternoon were 27,848 people. We have suffered grievously. And these statistics, of course, do not include Americans who are in Iraq but not as combat troops. There's a large number of Americans. The morning New York Times estimated there were 130,000 contractors in the country. That's this morning's New York Times. When they die, someone sends a check for a small amount of money to their family, but nobody writes down the number because they're private contractors. It also develops that when they kill other people, as they seem to have done last week, they are in fact held harmless by the legal relationship between the United States government and the Iraqi government. Will the war be successful? Is this liable to be something we're going to be able to rescue at the last minute? Will the cavalry come to our assistance? It's a complicated issue, and I wrote in this magazine, which has been floating around, good-looking guy on the cover, I don't know who he is, but if you look inside, there's an article by me in which I talked about the possibility or improbability of the war being successful. I don't want to go into it now, but it seems to most academic observers that what we are facing, pretty much no matter what we do, is a protracted period of civil war in Iraq. As the several sides, there's maybe 5 separate sides in the country, and as they fight it out to establish dominance, possibly partitioning the country in the process. The French diplomat Talleyrand once said, when talking about an element of French foreign policy, "This is worse than evil, monsieur, it's stupid." And it may be that we can apply that to the situation in Iraq. Now, that's the easy question, if you can imagine that. The hard question, of course, is what do we do about it? What do you do about it? What do I do about it? Recent testimony, and by recent I mean last week, by General David Petraeus and American ambassador to Iraq, Crocker, has clarified the situation. Actually, we have a better sense of what's going on now than we did 2 weeks ago. The numbers are complicated and hard to deal with, partially because the Department of Defense is not maybe telling us the total truth about the numbers. But it seems likely, from what David Petraeus told us or told Congress last week, that the soldiers who were sent over as part of the surge will be withdrawn when their tours of duty, their 15-month tours of duty, are completed, and will not be replaced, he would say, because we don't need them. Others would say because we don't have any more soldiers. We pretty well got every available fighting person over there. This leaves something in the neighborhood of 130,000 combat forces in country. Again, this number is also complex because many of the soldiers are in fact based elsewhere. Many of them are in fact based in Kuwait. Most of the supply people sleep in Kuwait and are based in Kuwait and make runs into the country and come back out again at night. Many of the aviators are in fact flying off the decks of aircraft carriers, and they're not part of that 130,000 people as well. Despite talk of new strategies and new approaches to the war, it seems likely that we will go on doing for the next 17 months of the Bush presidency approximately what we have done for the last 4.5 years. Whether, and we all need to make a decision, whether or not 130,000 guys plus an approximate equal number of contractors can accomplish in the next 17 months what they have been unable to accomplish in the last 4.5 years. What is our responsibility if we conclude that it is pointless to go on supporting this war? If you can conclude that the war is a good idea, I mean, if you think that Mr. Bush has got it spot on, we've got a great new general, and he's General Petraeus, Dr. Petraeus, as he also is probably the best modern general that we've got. So we've got a good new general, and our troops are just beginning to make progress. If you can reach that conclusion, then your moral responsibilities are easy. You can go home and sleep well tonight. The president tells us that he sleeps well at night, and you can join him in quality sleep. If you are concerned that the war isn't going to improve and that we're not at the end of the day going to win, then you have some grievous moral responsibilities and you really do need to think. Let me offer two examples of people grappling with moral responsibility. In July of 2005, I was in England that summer, and a man called Mohammed Sidi Khan led a group of 3 other young Muslim men. He himself was a Muslim, although they were all born in the United Kingdom. They came from their home in Yorkshire, where they all lived, and they traveled on the train down to London, bringing with them powerful improvised explosives, which they carried in rucksacks. They got onto trains, underground trains and buses in London, and on the 7th of July of that month, what the British call 7/7, they killed themselves, they blew themselves up, and they blew up 75 of their fellow passengers. Some months after the attack, Al-Qaeda, which had apparently orchestrated it, released a suicide video. This is their habit, you've probably seen them, where someone who is going to kill himself is going to conduct a so-called martyrdom operation, faces the camera, and says effectively, I'm sane, I know what I'm doing, I'm not being driven to this, this is why I'm doing it, I'm happy to be doing it. By the time you see this, I'll be dead, but I'll be in heaven. And with his soft Yorkshire accent, because he was born in the north of England, Sidi Khan said, and I quote, "Your democratically elected governments continuously perpetrate atrocities against my people all over the world, and your support of them makes you directly responsible." Now, nobody is even minimally suggesting that Sidi Khan was justified in carrying his protest to the point that he did. Oddly enough, many of the people he killed were poor, and among London's poor are a very large number of Muslims who are not in fact citizens of Great Britain. So his most astonishing achievement was to kill a group of blameless other Muslims in the process of protesting against inhumanity to Muslims. But let's go back to his point. If we democratically elect a government and it carries out operations of which we morally disapprove, and if we do nothing, then we are responsible. If there's something that we could be doing, something that we should be doing, then we accept implicitly responsibility for what has happened. Let me tell you about someone whose son I got to know very well. The father was a man called Ernest Hankamer, and he was a professor of philosophy. I produced this story because we are among philosophers today. This is organized by the philosophy department. And he was a philosopher at the University of Heidelberg and a specialist in the early existentialist philosophers. You can imagine how much fun his classes were. He was teaching at Heidelberg when Hitler's racist theories were made mandatory. Hitler sent around to German universities instructions that the superiority and the supremacy of the Aryan race needed to be made part of lectures in the German higher educational system. Ernest Hankamer in the mid-1930s was too old to be drafted into the German army. He wasn't Jewish, so he was under no under no threat from that angle. And he wasn't a radical. He wasn't very political. He liked existentialist thought, and that's what he spent his time doing. Instead of keeping his head down, staying at the university, surviving the war, and growing old in his tenured chair, he said to his family, our government has gone mad. We can't live here under these circumstances. He packed them all up. They moved to the United States. He never mastered English well enough to teach in an American university, and he ended his days as a bus driver. So what he had in fact sacrificed for his political beliefs was, in short, virtually everything. The Hankamer response. What should we do? I keep coming back to that question. The theory of popular sovereignty is that we control our government, that we are the American government, those of us who are American citizens. Remember Lincoln, this government of the people, for the people, by the people, et cetera. That's us. We're meant to control the government. In theory, then, we can tell the government what we want it to do, reward it for doing what we want it to do, and punish it for its failure to do what we want them to do. What does it seem to be our minimal responsibilities under these circumstances? If you agree with me, as I say, if you agree with President Bush, then you're home and dry. You don't have to do anything. But if you agree that the war is unwise, that it was unethical, what do you need to do to sleep well at night? Well, minimum, I suppose, you need to find out what's going on. You need to read the papers, read between the lines. Finding out what's going on in Iraq these days is a hard thing to do. Most of the information is provided by the military, and the military can be very accurate in what they provide, but this information gets funneled through propaganda offices in the White House, and what turns out, what appears on the television and the newspapers can be a long way from what's actually happened. You need to decide what you want to have happen. Some people think that we should bring all the troops home tomorrow. Other people think we need to withdraw very slowly. Some people have concluded that we need to keep permanent bases in the region. One way or another, we need to decide what we want to do. And then we have to let the government know precisely how we feel. How can you do that? Well, you can, I suppose, write them a letter would be one way. You can go and see them, knock on somebody's office if you can find a congressman or a senator in his office. A devil just popped into my mind and suggested that I said that you could knock on Senator Craig's, stall it but that was an evil thought, and I won't say it. You go and find them wherever they happen to be, and you tell them what you think. You could mount a demonstration. You know, we did here at Coastal. And I see Don Millis sitting in the audience. I don't know if Jim Henderson is here or Dan Abel is here, but Don and Jim Henderson and I and Dan Abel spoke at a demonstration on this campus in the spring of 2003. We had all the impact, I guess, of a hiccup and a hurricane, but we stood up and said, with a group of students, what we thought. Do we need to do that again? Why don't you guys organize it this time? I'm getting old. Not as old as Dr. Millis, but significantly old, and maybe this time it needs to come from the student body rather than the faculty. Popular protest, you know, if it's massive enough, can turn the government around. I'm not endorsing everything that happened in the 1970s to stop the war in Iraq, but in fact the war in Iraq was brought to an end, I think, in my view of history, by popular protest. The big difference, of course, in those days is we had something called the draft. Young American men of my generation were obligated to join the armed forces, and if the government decided that we needed to go to Vietnam and defend democracy in southern Vietnam, we went whether we wanted to or not. And one of the reasons why you aren't out waving signs in front of this building is that you're not going to go. This is something that's going to happen to other people. It's not going to happen to you. Maybe you have a moral responsibility to think about the lives and fortunes of the black kids, the Hispanic kids, the kids from the Appalachian Mountains who are being sent because they come from economically deprived circumstances and have very little else that they can do. What should the universities do? Once again, in the article for the Coastal Carolina University Magazine, I made the case that maybe universities have a special obligation, that we need to step up and do things that we're not doing. You know, back in 2002 and 2003, Jim Henderson actually and I held a series of community forums about the Middle East in which we just tried to talk about it. Both of us were convinced that the United States was going to war in the spring of the following year. And as we prepared for these community forums, we discovered that people like me, I mean, every university with its name has a politics department, and every politics department has a Richard Collin. That is to say, the guy who gets to distinguish between Iraq and Iran and tell you what the difference between Sunnis and Shiites is. In 2002 and 2003, every Richard Collin at every American university knew that the war was going to be a catastrophe. Most of us didn't say very much. I was a tenured full professor in 2002. I had very little to lose. There's not much you can do to a tenured full professor. And I risked nothing. I had to show no courage whatsoever to stand up and say, this is a bad idea, let's not do it. It may be that universities didn't protest because we were too busy writing esoteric little articles for refereed reviews, because we were worried about tenure, we were worried about promotion, we were worried about offending the politicians that fund us, we were worried about irritating our own superiors. Maybe what we need to do is to get braver. Maybe what we need as universities and as professors at universities is to reach out to our colleagues at other universities and try and establish common positions when communality actually exists. Should we punish the people who led us into this war? This is a delicate topic, and I step into it gently, but some people told us some things that weren't true. We don't know if they were lying or just massively deluded about what was going to happen when we sent an army into the Middle East. But the fact is that people said we would be greeted with bouquets of flowers and greeted as liberators, and we only were for the first 20 minutes. By the end of the hour, people were shooting rockets at us. I'm not a famous enough political scientist to have any laws named after me, but I propose Collin's first law of political science, which should be, if you don't know what you're doing, don't kill anybody until you've figured it out. I may have to work on the language a little bit, but that should be a basic law of political science. The people who led us into the war in 2003 really didn't know what they were doing. I think that they should leave public life. That the cadre of political leaders who voted for the War Powers Resolution in October of 2002 all need to fall on their swords. To me, it's like a reformed pedophile. Somebody molests little girls, they get sent off to the big house, they do 5 years of hard time, and they come back into the community, and we say, okay, you've paid your debt to society, but we don't actually want you to serve as a deputy assistant scoutmaster. You can't actually open a daycare center and stay the hell away from the playgrounds in our public schools. We don't know if this is fair or unfair, but it will make sense to any parent with a child. It seems to me that the people who voted for the War Powers Resolution in 2002 either did it because they were convinced that it was a good idea, in which case they really don't know enough about world affairs to be in charge of them, or even worse, they knew it was a bad idea, but it was a popular bad idea and they voted for it anyway. Either way, all of these people need to be voted out of office the next time we get a chance to vote them out of office. I want to know, what do you think? And so what I'm going to do, I'm actually 4 minutes ahead of schedule here, and what I'd like to do is to stop, take your comments. Comments probably are more important than questions. I don't think I've got any more answers than this. Take your comments, take your questions, and then what we'll do is we'll go out and have tea. Claudia has promised me that there'll be gin in my cup and not tea. but we'll go out and get whatever Claudia has in store for us. But first, let's, as they used to say, let's wrap. Let's talk a little bit first. I've got a question right down here.
I have an important question. If the United States did not go to war because we were in danger of being attacked with weapons of mass destruction, if we did not go to war for humanitarian reasons, why did we go?
I think PhD students in history are going to be spending the next half century answering that question. And here's what I think, and I don't know. The straight answer to your question is I don't know why we went to war. It will be I'm glad I'm retiring in a bit because I don't want to have to try and explain to students in 15 years why we did this because it's complicated. I think one thought on the issue, and that is that multiple choice quizzes have given us the impression that for everything big that happens in life, there's one correct answer and three incorrect answers. And so we're looking for that correct answer in the multiple choice quiz. I suspect that there was a coterie of people at the senior ranks of the American government who had a variety of different reasons for wanting to go to war. It may be that some of them innocently thought that the war would be easy to conclude, that we would walk over and the Iraqis would authentically be grateful. You know, there's a certain percentage of the American public that would go to war with New Zealand if the president said, and New Zealanders, they're threatening the stability of all the waves in the South Pacific, and they have sheep of mass destruction. You could get 25% of the country to go to war just by lowering your voice and talking about mass destruction. I think probably there was some sense that to appeal to conservatives, we had to quote-unquote finish the job that Bush the first had theoretically begun. So there may have been an Oedipus complex involved here that the young Bush could do what the older Bush has been unable to do. Oil, you know, when you attack a place, nobody attacks places that don't have oil, and Iraq has a lot of the stuff. But it may have been that as we watch Saudi Arabia go down the tubes, and it will at some point, that people were thinking we need a tame Arab country with lots of black greasy stuff that we can get our hands on. Some of the neocons may have genuinely believed that we could establish a garden of democracy in the Middle East and do it with the United States Marine Corps. Others may have thought that a good war would dispel forever the Vietnam syndrome. We could go in, fight a war, win it fairly easily, and we wouldn't be afraid to project American power into the region as well. I don't know that there's going to be one core reason that everybody shared. Weapons of mass destruction was something everybody could agree on. They sound horrifying, and it was something that could unify people into supporting the program. But I don't think that there was necessarily one core motive, secret motive, lingering in the dark heart of Vice President Cheney that he will someday tell us on his deathbed or on his memoirs. It was a combination, I suspect, of motives. Miss, a question right here.
Could it be pure evil? Could it be the fact
Is he pure evil?
No, could it be in fact?
Could it be evil?
That there was an evil involved?
You know, I laughed at your question, and I shouldn't, because it's a reasonable.
Because what I'm saying is, it's very possible that the government itself created 9/11, and the government itself, not the government,
Yeah.
this core group of people that eventually surrounded themselves with a military force, so they're impractical and unquestionable.
Yeah.
And unimpeachable, basically, they're going to ride it right out, knew exactly what they were going to get-go,
Yeah.
put in there, and they whipped up all this fear, just like it's fascism.
Yeah, political scientists are made really uncomfortable by the word evil because we can't define it, we can't measure it, we can't count it, and it upsets us. The reason I said I shouldn't have chuckled when you asked your question about Cheney being evil is that we don't really know what's going on in these people's minds. The whole process of electing presidents and vice presidents is such a bizarre ritual. What we make them do, we had presidential candidate Barack Obama here the other day, and I went to see him, And I was thinking, what a waste of a good mind. This poor guy has to schlep around the country in a bus, giving the same speech over and over again. What Barack needs to do is to get some books out and read about how to be a president, rather than simplifying answers, which is what you have to do. Presidential candidates have to come up with squishy, simple answers to complicated questions and convince people that they can deal with these problems. In the notion of the context between 9/11, I think 9/11, going back to Sandy's question, 9/11 had a lot to do with the ability of the government to persuade us to go to war. The notion that the American government caused 9/11, I don't see any evidence for it. If this government had tried to do it deliberately, that it missed and got booked to the nearest Walmart, I mean, this is not a government capable of competence. There's a question right back here, lady was waiting.
I was wondering, is in that area, such as like the Kurds in the north that are actually doing really good and democracy could work there if they became independent?
Yeah. The Kurdish north, whatever we may see in the papers, is a long way from being a democracy. On the other hand, it's stable and it's safe and it's prosperous. In the article that I waved at you, I did suggest that as we plan our extraction, as we plan our exit strategy from Iraq, we might need to want to take that into account. And I in print have said maybe we want to leave some forces in the north to protect the Kurds not from the Arabs particularly, they could handle that by themselves, but from the Turks, who may find their position. The Turks right now are massing on the border of Iraq and have threatened a number of times to go in and attack them.
What about Syria?
What about
Syria?
There's an awful lot of empty desert between Syria and the heartland of Iraq. I don't think Syria is capable of doing much beyond a certain amount of minor mischief on the size. John? And then, yeah.
Just for the record, I'd rather go hunting with Cheney than ride in a car with Kennedy.
With who?
With Kennedy.
Oh. Okay.
But for the record, I think what we're underestimating, what we really didn't touch on is you talk a little bit about, I know the Bush administration coined the phrase, a war on terror. To me, this is a new war. This is a war we've never seen before. We talked a little bit about being preemptive and whether it's good or bad. See, I believe what we're doing is the right thing preemptively. I don't think we can sit back and wait for 9/11 to happen. So in that regard, nobody likes war, nobody likes to see people die, much less innocent women and children. So what would you suggest we do if we were to pull up right now?
Okay, well, my analysis of the situation is totally different from yours. I think we're making another terrorist attack on the United States more likely by creating a whole new generation of Al-Qaeda terrorists and giving them a nice place to train and work on the techniques of blowing up Americans in Iraq. When Obama was here last week, he said with Iraq there are bad choices and worse choices. And so one of the things is that we Americans love happy endings. And I think one of the things that American leaders are not doing is preparing us for the likelihood that there will be no happy ending here. This is going to end badly no matter what we do at this point. If St. Thomas Aquinas or St. Francis of Assisi becomes president tomorrow, it's still going to end badly. St. Francis of Assisi, for your information, was almost certainly a Democrat, but that's another issue. The idea that we're fighting terrorists in Iraq that we would otherwise have to fight in Myrtle Beach is just, to me, too crazy to contemplate. They're fighting us because we invaded their country. If we withdrew from their country, we might still have a problem with Al-Qaeda. And what we would have to do is think in terms of our relationship to the whole Middle East. Do we want to be as closely involved in supporting Israel as we are? Do we want to have that huge military presence in the Middle East that we have? Do we want to go on economically depending upon Middle Eastern oil to the extent that we are? Would we be better off looking for domestic supplies of energy, renewable, sustainable supplies of energy, which would allow us to subtract ourselves from the Middle East? All these questions we need to go into. Dan?
May I make one comment?
Sure.
And ask a question?
Yeah.
The first comment is, I think, to respond to the last point, to conflate this war with the war on terror is something that's done very loosely by the administration and in the media, and nobody in the media questions it. And since Osama bin Laden despised Saddam Hussein, and since Saddam Hussein was fearful of people like Osama bin Laden, we certainly can't say that starting it was something about the war on terror. That's absurd. That's like saying that someone, because they wore a turban and have roughly the same skin tone, are all like Osama bin Laden, which is racist and ridiculous. It's like judging all white people by Timothy today. My question is, I have a question that from your speech I don't think was answered. I'm waiting for someone to answer this question. You said whether you believe we can be successful or not. Or if you believe we can't be successful, you do something. If you believe we can be successful, you sleep well at night. Can you tell me what constitutes the objective of this war?
Oh gosh, since I opposed the war 6 months before it happened, I'm a bad person to ask what the objective was. The state.
No one tells me what it is, man.
Yeah, the state. All I can do is repeat to you what the administration said at the time, which was to defend the United States from weapons which were believed to be in the hands of the Iraqis, and to bring democracy to Iraq. I'm not sure at this moment. The first objective disappeared when weapons didn't turn out. Whether we have any chance at all in establishing a democracy. For a moment, it looked like a rough and ready kind of democracy was emerging, but now there's a government in place which barely controls the green zone in downtown Baghdad. It certainly doesn't have much control over the rest of the country. So the notion that we're going to be able to create a government that will endure there is difficult at the moment. But I'm really the wrong guy to ask what the goal was. It goes back to Sandy's question before, why did we go into the war? And the answer is I'm not sure why we went into the war. It satisfied a whole bunch of private goals that people had. Let me get some more questions here. This gentleman right here, and then two people over there.
Yeah, but you have, based on your arguments you presented, would you have opposed going to war against Germany in World War II? Because the situation is very similar.
No. Germany was a material threat to the United States. It had long-range weapon systems of the state-of-the-art. A German victory in World War II would have created a very unfree world in which the United States would have had some difficulty in flourishing. So I would have supported. I was actually born in 1940, so I wasn't an important figure in the war, but I would have supported Roosevelt's decision to take the United States into war.
Because at the time, only 40% of Americans supported going to war against Hitler, but 65% of people going to war against Saddam. So what you're saying is, based on popular opinion, we should have gone to war against Iraq, but not against...
But I'm not basing my argument on popular opinion. I was aware that 70% of Americans, believing the incorrect statements that were produced by the government, were prepared to go to war against Saddam Hussein in 2003. There's no question about that. And it's a historical fact that most Americans were very dubious about the idea of going. On the other hand, you see, attacking Saddam Hussein is one thing. Attacking Adolf Hitler is something that's another order of magnitude altogether. Had Hitler won, he had taken over all of Europe. He had taken over all of Europe by that time. Had he knocked the Soviet Union out of the battle in 1941 or 42, you'd have faced a Europe which was Nazi-controlled from the gates of Straits of Gibraltar to the Pacific Ocean. There was never that likelihood or never that kind of possibility coming out of Iraq. Iraq has 26 million people roughly before the war began. It never had the kind of potential to dominate the world that Hitler's Germany did from 1933 on. In my view. There was a question over here.
Richard, excuse me 1 minute.
What
It's 5:30. We're going to continue, but I promise to tell you when 5:30 meeting, if anybody gets so if you have to leave,
But
that's
we can also
fine.
let people move forward.
Maybe.
Or if you're going to stay in the demonstration. Yeah.
of people that supported the war voted for it, so they should like leave public life or whatever. And at the time, Hillary Clinton, I know she voted for it, but it's actually the Democratic nominee. So I'm not asking her, do you think people should just not vote?
Stand here and exchange ideas and answer questions and respond to points. At some point, we'll all get thirsty and go out and I'll get my gin and the rest of you will get tea. Or not. But so let's talk. She's from the FBI. Let's go to this pair right here and then I'll come to you this. Yes, fellas.
What I was going to ask was, what is your opinion on a large number of administration officials, Cheney included, have ties to the military and industrial complex? And do you think that was one of the reasons that swayed them to wage this war, because it's made so much money for the industry?
It goes back to this lady's very good question. Are they evil? To launch a war so you can make money is morally about the same level as knocking over a liquor store on the 501. I mean, there's not a lot of difference. You're going to shoot people and hurt people and frighten people. And if you do it well, I'm not sure that Cheney and Bush could rob a liquor store, but to do it well, you come away with some change. Were they thinking that? I don't know. I think there's never been a president in my lifetime of looking at presidents that I felt less of a sense of personality. I don't know what's going on in Mr. Bush's mind. So I don't know what he was thinking. I don't know what Mr. Cheney was thinking. Mr. Cheney speaks very little. He certainly does have these close ties. He was collecting remuneration from Halliburton while awarding unbid contracts to Halliburton. So clearly it didn't hurt him economically to be doing what he was doing. Whether that was what we was thinking or not, I don't know. We can only judge by what people do, not what they say. Another question right here, and then we'll come to this lady.
Okay, you stated that the many rich powers of America has already, before we went to war, knew the war was going to be a catastrophe, was not going to work out. Right now, why aren't the rich powers of America helping to lead the people against this administration? I mean, remember, people are the power of the government. However, people need to be led. Why aren't the people who knew about the war was going to be a catastrophe helping leading those people to help ratify what's going on now?
Well, I'm here talking to you.
But that's just not enough to help lead the people to do something. We need an active leader to help them focus on what they need to do.
I think we need to do some thinking first. Just Jim Henderson, I'm sorry he's not here because I'd like to introduce him, but Jim Henderson has been a die-hard anti-war campaigner from the very beginning. We started in the summer of 2002 thinking about what we could do on this campus. And Jim has spent a lot of time standing in the rain waving signs saying no war on Iraq, we'll bring the troops home and things of this nature. And he keeps getting colds from doing this. I've done less of that sort of thing. It's a little, I think what we need to do is to settle down and say, okay, what do we want to see happen? I mean, what's the idea of bringing out all the troops tomorrow is probably not reasonable. Some of them would get killed. Among other things, we've got to get their gear out, we've got to get them out in peace, in one piece. And as I point out, what we need to do something to secure the destinies of the people we're leaving behind. I guess what I would like to see happen is for us to build hospitals and universities in the country and begin to slide over, as long as we're welcome there, into a humanitarian posture rather than a military posture, and let the Iraqis kind of do whatever they're going to do. It's not going to be pretty, but if we're putting Band-Aids on people rather than putting holes in them, they, at the end of the day, they'll like us better. Having said that, they're not going to like us a lot when they're doing this. Now, this lady had a long delayed question. Yes, Miss.
You talked about humanitarian reactions rather than war. I did meet a veteran from this war who said his best part of the service was working with the communities, working with the children. The other question is, as students of history, and I wasn't really aware of this, I went to Greece, and the girl who was our guide, the young people, talked about all the wars that Greece has been through. There's a war all the time. They're attacking Greece, Turkey,
Well, they did, yes.
Who's going around the country?
I'm just thinking, they did have several civil wars, yeah.
As a student of history, why are we all surprised that Iraq is in the Civil War? That's the next step.
Yeah.
The other thing too is our American history. After the American Revolution, we started working on things we ourselves got into the Civil War. This is how man works things out.
Yeah.
And again, I have to, but it's a long story. That's a lesson.
It's all right. I've forgotten the first two already.
This war wasn't going to be successful. And what did you think at the time you should have done?
Well, actually, I stood at this stage at the time, and I brought it along just to wave at you. I was this English teacher scholar in 2002, and I stood up here and said, "This is not going to work, guys. It's the Iraqis will fight back, and eventually they'll drive us out, and it's right here." So I tried to say back in 2002, in the autumn of 2002, that this was a really bad idea. I've learned an awful lot about Iraq since that time, but nothing to change my original assessment that the war was unlikely to turn out to be a good experience for anybody. I think this, as I said before, the scholars who understood the region were pretty unanimously against the war, to include most of the famous scholars, far better scholars than I, people who lived in the region for years, speak all the languages and so on. Some of you took my course in the Middle East last semester, and we had a book by a man called Polk. And Polk is about the senior scholar in the world, lived, spent most of his life in that part of the world, speaks the languages like natively. And at the very beginning, he tried to point out that it wasn't going to work. And then he wrote a textbook that we used in class last semester, and I think I'm going to use it again this semester. We should this gentleman here had a question.
Yes, sir. If I can just ask right here. Henderson,
okay, speak up so we can hear.
Granted that we've screwed things up when we went into Iraq, and I think because of that, we do have a moral and an ethical obligation to try and put the country back together. My question is, can we ever get to the point where we say, regardless if the situation is still screwed up, we have fulfilled that obligation, and we no longer have moral?
People who think the thoughts that I think about there typically feel that the country is too badly fragmented at this point for us to put it together again. There's a phrase, culpability without capability, that's been floating around the academic community, meaning we may have broken it, but all the king's horses and all the king's politicians can't put this particular country back together again. All we can do, I think, at this point is stop making the problem worse and stop shooting people. I would, if I were president, I would order the armed forces only to shoot to defend themselves, and to start working on a plan for getting most of our combat forces out of the country, except those needed to defend hospitals and healthcare centers and things like that. I would try to put up maybe on the borders so that Iraqis who had sustained injuries or illnesses because of the war could come back. There's less electricity now, there's less running water now, the sewage system still doesn't work. And we can't make it work. This is sort of we ought to be good at. We can't make it work because our engineers are not safe when they go out to try and repair these facilities. So our presence is to me part of the problem. It won't start, I suspect it'll get worse after we leave. And it won't start getting better for many, many years after we're gone. So the idea that we have to stay now because we broke it, we have to fix it, I don't think we can fix it. Only the Iraqis can fix it. It's going to take them a long time. They're going to, I think, going to kill each other for all the work we've tried to do. We've tried to get the Shiites to forgive the Sunnis because it would be convenient for an American politician. They've hated each other for 1,400 years, and the Sunnis have brutalized the Shiites for 1,400 years. The idea that they're going to jump into bed with one another before the next election is so loony that only somebody who lives in Washington could think it. Yes, Ms.
Richard, we can take a couple more questions.
I just have to say this man's been teaching all day, and I don't want to absolutely exhaust him.
He's
and
tough.
so-
He'll stay there.
He is
He
tough.
needs
You
to-
may know. You older, he's tough.
He volunteered for this.
No, he did not try. And so I'm going to let Richard call time when he's ready. We have tea out there.
Okay.
You're welcome to come have a cup.
Great, thanks.
Okay.
This, there you go, question.
I just have two things. First off, I read that they were going to bring 30,000 troops home, and then I was told by someone in the Army that they were going to send 300,000 fresh troops in February. You know, if there's
The numbers are really screwy because Mr. Bush announced for his surge last year that he was going to send 21,500 fresh troops into the region. He actually sent something closer to 30,000 troops. They're now talking about bringing home the 21,000 troops that they were supposed to have sent, which really will leave the country with about 10,000 more troops than it had before the surge began. 300,000 is probably, the number probably comes from adding the 150 that are there now with 130,000 some odd contractors, and added to that maybe some people who are based in Kuwait. The things, we often compare this war to Vietnam. There may be actually more fighting men in Iraq right now than there were in Vietnam. We have about 500,000 men in Vietnam, but Don, you were there and you can remember a lot of them were mess kit repair battalions who weren't actually out there fighting. We had about 70,000, 80,000 guys on a given day actually fighting. We've got more than that in Iraq now. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I did things such as take the Black Miss America show out for the boat ride.
Research here. That's
my
what
own
I
research. But I was basically sent there to turn out the lights. But back to your point about involvement, Ho Chi Minh, and you probably could find this better than I because you're a scientist, theater scientist, said to an American in a lot of stages of the war, how many of your young people are you willing to sacrifice? 50,000, 60,000, 70,000. Yeah. How few of my contemporaries at Coastal, practically none, served in Vietnam, because that whole generation of university people got out of the draft. As a matter of fact, that's why they went into the university, many of them, to avoid the draft. Okay. And there's no draft now, so as you pointed out so well, it's people who are looking for a good job and a way up the ladder who are taking it. So that was part of the reason that you didn't have a serious protest from the university. You had no generation of World War II soldiers who eventually said, let's use some common sense. And back to our talk, if George W. didn't listen to his father, why the hell should he listen to me when I told him this is thinking this is true?
Dale had a question right back there.
Yeah, I wanted to let everyone know that Greg Palast, he's a reporter for the BBC, has a very excellent book on the madhouse. And the chapter is called The Flow, about a lot of the shenanigans that have been going on in Iraq. Essentially, Paul Bremer's plan to sell off the Iraqi economy. Right now, Iraq's the only country in the world, as of writing, that has no tariff protection at all. And Palast mentions two plans that Bush had before a meeting in California in 2001. One which was to bust OPEC by allowing Iraq to produce as much oil as possible. And then the other plan which won out, which was to control production to keep oil prices artificially high as per the Saudis' specifications. And it's a very interesting book. It's called Armed Madhouse.
Greg Palast.
Yeah, or Palast.
A well-known author. Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Let me try to get some new people. Sir. Let's see. On your side.
Dr. Collin, I remember when we were protesting against when you had the thing on the wall. Unfortunately, I was there in support of the war. Now I've come to say I was wrong. But being in
you can buy the agenda time earliest convenience.
I just was wondering if you were struck by any sense of deja vu between what went on then with Iraq and what's going on now with Iraq.
Oh, it's deja vu all over again, yeah. The same people who told us there was a desperate danger from Iraq are telling us that there's desperate danger from Iran. I can't believe they're that enough to do it again, but on the other hand, they might be that enough to do it again. I don't think anybody thinks that they're going to invade Iran, because we simply don't have the troops. We have to send them equal weapons at this point. The army is used. The danger is that we might bomb it, and that would be a catastrophic error if we were to do that. Among other things, we've got this huge army in Iraq. The Shiite population would turn against us. At the moment, we're not really fighting that many Shiites. Most of the fighting is against Sunnis. And Al-Qaeda is a Sunni organization. So what you always need to think about, every young military officer is taught, don't worry about what the enemy might do, worry about what it can do. And what the Iranians could do is move an army in right into southern Iraq. They would enjoy the support of the local population, and they would cut off our retreat. I mean, we would have to come down to Tigris and Euphrates with our stuff. They could put an army twice the size of ours there, and they could do it in 24 hours. We would also rescue the regime. It's a terrible regime. Iran is run by religious thugs at the moment. And they're pretty unpopular among the Iranian people, but one American bomb in Isfahan, and they would rally around the flag. We would save the regime just as Saddam Hussein saved the regime in 1980 when he attacked the Ayatollah Khomeini. The Ayatollah was far from being in solid power at that time, but he was saved by thuggery from Yes, sir.
You use the term contractors. This North Carolina-based firm, Blackwater, are those employees contractors or are they just mercenaries?
This is a question of words.
We're paying them to go there, they're fighting.
We in the United States have a law prohibiting mercenaries. Therefore, any American who's over there working with the American government is by definition not a mercenary. He must be a contractor because we don't allow mercenaries. I mean, it's a question of terminology. One of the things that makes the force in Iraq bigger than it looks is that in most armies and in most wars, there's a whole series of support jobs which are done by soldiers. And in Iraq, now most of these jobs are being outsourced. Blackwater is famous for protection of important people. So the embassy, you know, every other embassy I've been to, and I've been to a lot of them over the years, every other embassy, the ambassador and his staff are protected by the Marine Corps. And the people who mess with the Marine Corps and are still walking around are limited in number. They're pretty good at it. All of that has been contracted out now. And Blackwater, which may be evicted from Iraq or may not be, as of the other day, is a contractor. Now, it would be really cruel, and I think unpatriotic of you to call them mercenaries. Let me see, there's another unanswered question right there. Sorry, Sandy, I would get everybody once.
I want to make a comment. I have to say that I'm like you. I knew we were going to go in. I knew it was wrong. I don't know how I know. I'm not brilliant. I just figured it out. And I got on the phone and called the White House, and I have emailed people, and I have written, and I protested in Vietnam, and I wrote letters. And I'm so frustrated because I have 4 sons who are all making gobs of money and have children, and they're wonderful and all that. And when I call them and discuss it, they go, "Oh, Mom, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it." And I said, "Look, I'm tired of this. It's your turn."
Yeah.
And I look at all the interested people here, but the reason that we were interested was there was a draft.
Yeah.
And my husband was going to go, and at the last minute his unit wasn't sent. There is no reason for anyone to be interested here. And I don't understand why the public, even though they voted the Democrats in, why aren't they screaming?
Yeah.
Why are we not doing anything?
I guess the reason I'm standing here today, interrupting, I must say, my afternoon nap, which is what professors get into this profession for. I guess the reason I'm standing here today is because I precisely share your anguish on the issue. It seems to me that we ought to be violently upset about this. We're spending trillions of dollars on it. It's going to wind up badly. Why there isn't a mob of people around the White House shouting, resign, resign, impeach, impeach, I don't know.
But even if you were for the war and you love Bush, doesn't anybody care?
I got him right here.
Doesn't anybody care about the kids dying every day and being maimed? I mean, every day they delay making some sort of decision.
Yeah.
More people are being killed, but everybody just goes, oh, no.
Well, let me respond to your question as a political scientist here. I think that the politicians, and that article I wrote for the University magazine spells this out in more detail. It seems to me that the politicians are all generally aware, in a kind of numb way that politicians are aware of things, that this is going to be a catastrophe. But instead of dealing with the catastrophe, they're positioning themselves so that somebody else gets the blame. What Mr. Bush is actually thinking, I don't know. But with the same number of forces over there doing the same things they've been doing for 4.5 years, all that keeping them there will accomplish is keeping the catastrophe somewhat at bay until he's not president anymore. If the Democrats really bring the troops home, and they could if they worked that a little harder, the catastrophe will happen when they have a Democrat in the White House, and that will be awkward. I guess I'm suggesting that our politicians have no souls. And I go back to evil. A wonderful point before.
Well, it also makes, I mean, almost every conversation I have with any adult who votes, no one can even think of who to vote for on either side. Because nobody believes anything anybody's saying. So here we are.
The question back there, or statement.
Well, she kind of shows a good point. Like, if you're morally opposed to war, I know earlier you said people who voted for it in 2002 should leave public life or be voted out of office. And it looks like Hillary Clinton will be, the Democratic nominee. And she voted for it. She was an ardent supporter, and she bought everything. And like, it dates back to the Clinton administration too. Like, they were saying the same things that George Bush said. So if you're morally opposed to the war, like, the Republican's going to be for it, obviously, probably Rudy. So if you're morally opposed to the war, who do you vote for?
Yeah, I don't know. This is a real puzzle.
You can't vote for Hillary.
Since I think the understanding has all told me this, that women are cleverer than men, I would like to see a woman become president of the United States.
But you would be able to vote for someone.
Mrs. Clinton is not going to get my vote.
But what if she is the nominee? Who do you vote for? You just sit out the
election for it. Okay, could be. And she needs now not to be the senator from New York. She's been saying very strange things about, I think if Mrs. Clinton is elected, and she may very well be, we will get somebody who will wind the war down bit by bit over a period of several years. I don't think there'll be a quick withdrawal. I'm married to a redheaded woman, and I'm frightened of redheads. This is my colleague, Holly, basically, and the joke that's been going around is, what's the difference between a terrorist and a redhead? And the answer is you can negotiate with the terrorist. Holly, talk with you.
I'm Richard. I don't teach international relations or international politics. I teach American politics, and I study public policy and presidential politics. And my students often say the reason that they don't care or they don't get involved is either they don't understand what's going on, they don't feel that what they do makes a difference, or that politicians lie to them. I'd like to make this point, and that is that in August of 2000, when George W. Bush was debating Al Gore in the lead up to the election, he very clearly said on national television multiple times, I would like to get rid of Saddam Hussein. So to say that we did not know that this was in his plan, in his playbook, is just because people weren't paying attention. And on the same lines, Colin Powell in the lead up to the war in Iraq said, look, you break it, you bought it. Be careful what you're doing. And he said it on television, and nobody paid attention. So I think if we, and even now, Hillary Clinton says, I would slowly withdraw. She's saying it. You just have to listen.
Done.
Just one historical point that has to be recalled, and most people forget this. The Coastal Carolina University helped elect George Bush hosted a rally for him when John McCain, who was a much more sensible man, incidentally also a veteran, incidentally a former POW, was attacked viciously and libelously by the Republicans supporting Bush. So look, it's on our head.
Yeah, we voted for him. I'm looking for new hands. I'm seeing one over there. Yes, yes, sir.
I have so many comments to make. First of all, I'm a military historian by trade.
You're what?
I'm a military historian by formation at Purdue. And I was lucky enough in 2002 to work with Derek Lieber in international security and the RAND Corporation. And as early as the second quarter of 2002, the Pentagon and the White House are getting reports on why not to get to Iraq. Now, we can wonder at this point why was nothing done.
Yeah.
We must remember that the people at the time in power, Cheney's and Wolfowitz and Rumsfeld, are the same people who at the end of the Cold War, and Team B, for example, we are making a case for weapons on the moon from the Russians and scaring Congress into giving more money to the U.S. Army. So I mean, it's happened before. That's why history evolves.
Yeah.
In answer to your comment about the war on terror, my specialty in medieval military history is guerrilla warfare. And at no point in time has military intervention been guerrilla warfare. There's no military answer to a problem that is not rooted with soldiers or policy. It goes much further than that. And I think it's arrogant from an administration to deny 2,000 years of military history and say we're going to fix this with our soldiers.
Your point about guerrilla wars is spot on. There isn't much of a track record of first world countries with conventional armed forces fighting third world countries with guerrilla warfare winning. Maybe Oman in the 70s would be a partial exception to that, but I can't think of it. And it's a very limited kind of thing.
And the very last comments I would like to offer is, as a historian, one of the things we try to do is look at what's going on now and how to fix it in the future. And the 2008 election raises a good point, is how many of those candidates had the foresight in 2002 to say, no, we will not vote for that. Yeah. There's not too many people with foresight and vision running right now.
Obama.
That's about the only one I can think of.
Barack Obama.
But I don't want to say vote for the guy.
But he did say in 2002 that he was against it. And he did say when he was here at Coastal the other day, the Iraq situation is gloomy. I don't have a magic answer for it. There are bad options and worse options. He's at least been kind of honest. Why anybody wants to be president in 2009 is beyond me, because you've got this huge bill to pay back. You've got a problem that's a lose-lose situation for him. You have to be, it would almost be better for Hillary if she didn't win this. You know what I think we ought to do, folks, is I think we ought to take this in